The storm was relentless, its thunder rolling across the countryside like a chorus of fury. I had always prided myself on seeking out the unknown, chasing the eerie whispers of ghost stories and haunted legends to feed my blog. But nothing had prepared me for this night. This was different. The rumors of the Chapel of Crimson Penance were unlike any ghost story I had ever encountered. They spoke of a cursed place, where devotion had twisted into madness, and of a cult that had sacrificed its own for the promise of eternal youth. The locals feared it, warning me with sharp glances and hushed voices. But my curiosity was insatiable. I'd been driving for hours, my car's headlights cutting through the dark, winding roads that led deeper into the desolate countryside. The land around me was nothing but dense woods and rolling hills. I had reached the edge of civilization and felt every inch of it when I saw the silhouette of the chapel rise from the fog, its Gothic spire reaching into the blackened sky. Like a warning, I knew I was at the right place. The chapel loomed, its stone walls cracked and weathered by centuries of neglect. The door, once grand, was now a decayed relic. It was swollen with age, covered in moss, and bolted with rusted iron. I knocked, the sound dull and unanswered. The place felt abandoned, yet there was something about it that didn't sit right. I pushed the doors open, my fingers brushing the cold, slick wood. They creaked in protest as I stepped inside. The interior was shrouded in an eerie gloom, the air thick with the scent of mildew and decay. The faintest light flickered from a row of candles, casting long shadows across the floor. The altar at the center of the room was adorned with strange relics, stained crimson as if soaked in blood. The sight made my stomach turn. My mind raced, but my instincts pushed me forward, urging me to uncover the secrets this place held. I fumbled through my bag, pulling out my camera to capture the atmosphere. The quiet was oppressive. Each step I took echoed against the stone walls, amplifying the silence. As I ventured further into the chapel, I discovered tattered scrolls and ancient scriptures, their pages yellowed with age. They were filled with strange symbols and rituals. One caught my eye, a description of an ancient cult that had worshipped the promise of eternal youth. The price of their devotion was chilling. Human sacrifice. I could feel the weight of the history pressing down on me. Every corner of the chapel seemed to whisper its grim tale, urging me to leave, but I couldn't. Not yet. The excitement of discovering something real, something tangible, kept me rooted in place. It was then that I heard her, the sound of a soft, rasping breath. At first, I thought it was my imagination, but then I saw her, standing in the doorway at the far end of the chapel. She was tall, unnaturally so, with skin so pale it was almost translucent. Her eyes were wide, too wide, and glowed faintly in the dim light. Her face was gaunt, drawn tight over the bones of her skull. She didn't move. She just stood there, staring at me. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered, her voice a haunting rasp that sent chills down my spine. I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could speak, the candles around the altar flickered and snuffed out, plunging the chapel into darkness. The sudden change was suffocating. My heart raced as I fumbled for my flashlight, my hands trembling. The woman's figure was gone. The only thing I could hear was the thunderous pounding of my own pulse in my ears. I shone the light around the room. It danced erratically, casting brief flashes of light across the chapel's stone walls. When it landed on the altar, I froze. The woman's warning echoed in my mind. But what was worse was the feeling, the unmistakable sense that something had shifted in the air. The oppressive silence had given way to something else, something darker. As I turned to leave, I realized the door behind me was now shut tight. I tugged at the handle, my breath quickening, but it didn't budge. I was trapped. Panic began to claw at the edges of my mind. The chapel, the woman, the altar, it all felt like a dream, like a nightmare that was slowly tightening around me. I reached my phone, desperate to call for help, but the screen flickered to life on its own. Strange static buzzed through the speakers, and cryptic messages began to appear. The penance must be fulfilled. The words were jagged, like they were being carved into the screen itself. I heard the chanting then. At first, it was just a faint murmur, barely audible over the rain beating against the chapel's stone walls. But then, It grew louder, more insistent. I turned in the direction of sound and saw shadows moving around the altar. Figures, cloaked in tattered robes, circled the candles that had reignited. Their faces were obscured, but I could feel their eyes on me, cold, unblinking. They chanted in a language I didn't understand, their voices rising in a maddening crescendo. I tried to run. I bolted toward the door, but it remained locked, as if the very walls of the chapel had sealed me in. I was trapped with them, with the figures who had come back to life from the pages of the dark rituals I had read. The realization hit me hard. This was no ghost story, no figment of imagination. This was real. This was a cult, and they were performing some ancient, twisted ceremony. I couldn't breathe. My chest felt tight, as if the very air around me was suffocating me. I glanced back at the altar. In the flickering candlelight, I saw something horrifying. The altar had been overturned, but beneath it, there was a pit filled with skeletal remains, their bones twisted and broken in unnatural ways. I could feel their eyes on me, though they were nothing more than hollow sockets now. The very pit seemed to exhale a cold breath, beckoning me closer. The chanting grew louder still. I couldn't stand it. My legs moved of their own accord, carrying me toward the altar. I was drawn to it, unable to resist. The figures continued their chant, their voices rising in unison, calling out to some unseen force. They were waiting for me. They wanted me. I felt a cold hand on my shoulder. I spun around, but no one was there, yet the touch lingered, crawling along my skin like ice. The shadows shifted, and I could feel the presence of something far older, far more malevolent than anything I had ever encountered. I reached for my camera, holding it up in a desperate attempt to capture something. Anything that could explain what was happening. But the lens caught nothing but darkness. The shadows closed in, their forms merged with the night, and I realized I was not just a witness. I was part of the ritual. The next thing I knew, I was on the floor, gasping for air. The world around me was a blur. I could hear the voices again, but they were distant now, fading away. When I opened my eyes, I saw the faint outlines of figures standing over me. Their faces were no longer concealed. I could see them clearly now, their eyes hollow, their expressions twisted with a hunger that sent a jolt of terror through me. I was unconscious when the police arrived. They found me lying on the cold stone floor, my body bruised, my mind shattered. The chapel, they said, had been empty for decades. No one had set foot there in years. But as they searched the altar, they found something that didn't fit. The fresh marks of blood, still damp, staining the stone. I never wrote about that night. My blog, once filled with tales of ghost stories and urban legends, became a thing of the past. I couldn't bring myself to write another word. There are some stories, some truths, that are better left untouched. I haven't returned to the countryside. The storm still haunts me in my dreams and in my waking moments. I can still feel the cold hand on my shoulder and hear the whisper of the cult's chant in the back of my mind. I know what they wanted, and I know what they took from me, and I know that the Chapel of Crimson Penance still waits. I was a marine biologist conducting a coastal survey when a gale trapped me on Devil's Cliff. The wind was unforgiving, howling like some ancient, wrathful god. Rain lashed at my face, cold and stinging, making it almost impossible to see beyond a few feet. My radio was dead, completely useless, and the rising tide made retreat impossible. No matter which way I turned, the storm raged in every direction, leaving no path to safety. The cliffs were jagged and treacherous, the crashing waves below a constant reminder of my vulnerability. I stumbled forward, soaked through, hoping to find shelter. Then, through the torrential downpour, I saw it, a faint flicker of light in the distance. It was weak, almost as if struggling against the storm itself. My heart leaped at the sight. A lighthouse. Surely, it would offer the refuge I so desperately needed. I made my way toward it, every step an effort against the wind. As I approached, I noticed the structure was ancient, its stone worn and weathered by time. The light at the top of the tower barely flickered, casting long, eerie shadows over the rocky shore. There was something unsettling about it, Something old and abandoned, yet still somehow functional. I reached the door, its surface cracked and swollen from years of exposure to the elements. Desperation drove me to pound my fist against it. The sound of my knuckles against wood echoed through the storm, and for a moment, I thought it might be in vain. But then, with a groan of protest, the door creaked open. A hunched figure stood in the doorway, his features obscured by the dim light. His eyes were sunken, deep pools of shadow that seemed to stare right through me. His voice, when he spoke, was a rasp like sandpaper dragging across stone. "Come in," he said, barely above a whisper. "Leave your coat by the door." There was something about his presence, something off, but I was too cold, too exhausted to question him. I stepped inside, and the door closed behind me with a heavy thud. The air inside was damp and musty, thick with the scent of mildew and something else, something coppery, metallic. The flickering fire in the hearth did little to warm the room, its light dancing wildly across the walls. A tattered journal lay on a table, its pages yellowed with age, the edges frayed. Symbols, intricate and unfamiliar, were scrawled across the pages in a hurried hand. I could feel the weight of the man's gaze on me, but when I turned to look at him, he was already retreating into the shadows, his form melting into the darkness. There was an odd stillness in the room, the kind that made your skin crawl, as if something unseen was watching, waiting. I moved closer to the fire, trying to warm my chill bones. My fingers ached, stiff from the cold, and I could feel the sting of the wet clothes clinging to my skin. But as the warmth began to seep into me, I noticed something strange. The storm outside, it didn't sound right. It was muted, as if the noise had been muffled by a thick, invisible barrier. The winds howled, the crashing waves, they should have been deafening, but instead, it was eerily silent. I turned to thank my host, to ask if he had any idea what was happening. But when I glanced over my shoulder, he was standing much closer than before. His hollow eyes locked onto mine, and his lips parted in a grotesque grin. "Did you see them yet?" he whispered, his voice trembling with a terrible, unnatural excitement. "They're coming!" A chill ran down my spine, and I took an instinctive step back. The journal on the table began to glow, faintly at first, but growing stronger with every passing second. I stared at the pages, unable to tear my eyes away as the symbols shifted and moved before me, as if alive. My heart pounded in my chest, and I felt a sickening sense of dread settle over me. This wasn't just a storm, and this wasn't just an old man with strange interests. Something was wrong. Something was terribly wrong. Then the scream came. It was high-pitched, a tortured wail that echoed from the tower above, carrying on the wind in a way that shouldn't have been possible. It wasn't human. It was something far darker, far older, and it chilled me to the core. Without thinking, I bolted from my seat, my legs moving on their own, driven by a primal instinct to flee. I dashed for the spiral staircase, my heart racing as I ascended in a frenzy. The wooden steps creaked beneath my weight, groaning as if protesting my every move. I barely noticed the dampness of the walls as I rushed upward, my thoughts consumed by the scream that still echoed in my ears. The air grew colder the higher I climbed, and with every turn of the staircase, the shadows seemed to press in closer. At the top, the door to the lighthouse tower was ajar, the faintest sliver of light spilling out into the stairwell. I pushed it open, and the scene before me stopped me dead in my tracks. There, in the center of the room, was a blood-stained altar, dark, red stains soaked into the stone, and around it lay skeletal remains, their bones twisted and contorted in unnatural poses. The walls were covered in more of the strange symbols, and the air was thick with the smell of decay. My mind struggled to comprehend what I was seeing, and as I took a hesitant step forward, a violent crash sounded from outside. The waves slammed against the glass with such force that I thought the tower might collapse under the pressure. Through the rain-smeared windows, I saw it, a shape, a serpent-like deity, its glowing eyes piercing the storm, its massive form coiling in the depths below. It was impossibly large, its body undulating in the darkness, rising and falling with the rhythm of the sea. I stumbled backward, my breath catching in my throat as a cold sweat broke out across my skin. A voice, low and guttural, spoke from behind me. "You were chosen," it rasped, to appease them. I whipped around, heart slamming in my chest. The man from below stood in the doorway, his face now twisted into something monstrous, his eyes hollow pits of blackness. He had moved so silently, so quickly, that I hadn't even heard him approach. Before I could react, he lunged, grabbing hold of my wrist with a grip like iron. "There is no escape," he hissed. "You will stay. You will help us." Panic surged within me, and I yanked my arm free, stumbling back toward the stairs. I bolted down them without looking, not daring to glance back at the twisted figure or the horrors that awaited me at the top. But as I reached the bottom, I found the way blocked. The man stood in front of the door, his form now bloated and unnatural, his features contorted into something far beyond human. The room seemed to warp around him, the air thick with the stench of decay and salt. "Don't you understand?" he snarled. "You're part of the sacrifice." I turned and ran, not caring about the storm, not caring about anything but escaping that place. The lighthouse behind me groaned, its walls cracking and shifting, the stone crumbling as if the very structure was being consumed by something far worse. As I reached the edge of the cliff, I heard the sound of waves crashing against the rocks, louder now, almost deafening. I turned one last time, just in time to see the lighthouse crumble, its ancient stones falling into the abyss below, dragging the man, and whatever he had summoned, into the dark waters. But even as I turned away and stumbled into the storm, a voice echoed in my mind, whispering from the depths of the sea, "It's not over.